Rain hammered the entrance of St. Michael's Trauma Center just after midnight, the kind of storm that made the ambulance bay lights blur into smears of red and blue. Nurse Elena Cross had worked the graveyard shift for 3 years, and in that time she had earned a quiet reputation. Steady hands, sharp instincts, and a face that never gave anything away. The other nurses joked that Elena could stitch a gunshot wound while calmly discussing lunch orders. What none of them knew was that her calm wasn't trained in nursing school. It was trained somewhere else entirely, somewhere that didn't exist on paper anymore. She was restocking the crash cart when she heard it, the low, unmistakable thrum of rotor blades cutting through the rain. Helicopters landed at St. Michael's occasionally, usually medevac birds bringing in trauma cases from the interstate. But this sound was different. Heavier. Military grade. Elena's spine straightened before her conscious mind even caught up. A reflex buried so deep she couldn't unlearn it if she tried. Through the sliding glass doors, she watched a black Sikorsky settle onto the helipad beyond the parking structure, its searchlight slicing through the downpour like a blade. Dr. Alan Whitfield, the attending physician on duty, stepped up beside her, frowning at the spectacle. "That's not one of ours," he said. "No markings. No calcign panted anywhere. That's not a hospital transport." Elena said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the men now filing out of the vehicle convoy that had pulled up behind the chopper. Black SUVs, engines still running, doors thrown open before the wheels had fully stopped. 6 men in tactical gear moved toward the entrance in a tight formation. Rifles slung but present, faces unreadable behind the low light. This wasn't a hospital security matter. This was something else, and every cell in Elena's body recognized it instantly. The automatic doors hissed open, and cold, wet air rushed into the lobby along with the men. The lead operator was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of scarred, weathered face that told a story of a decade spent somewhere the news never covered. He scanned the room methodically, reception desk, waiting area, hallway exits, the way a man does when he's memorizing an evacuation plan out of pure habit. Then his eyes landed on Elena, and he stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rest of the ER seemed to fade into background noise, the beeping monitors, the muffled cries from behind curtain 3, Dr. Whitfield's confused questions to the front desk staff. The operator took 2 slow steps forward, closing the distance between them, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear it clearly over the storm outside. Ghost. The word hit her like a physical blow. It had been 6 years since anyone had called her that. 6 years since she'd buried that name along with the rest of her old life, changed her hair, changed her walk, learned to flinch at loud noises like a normal civilian instead of instinctively calculating exit routes. She had built Elena Cross from nothing, degree, apartment, coffee order, the whole disguise, and she had done it so well that even she sometimes forgot the woman underneath. But apparently someone hadn't forgotten. Someone had spent 6 years looking. "You have the wrong person," she said, keeping her voice level, though her pulse had kicked into a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Around her, the ER staff had gone still, sensing the tension without understanding its source. Dr. Whitfield took a cautious step forward. "Is there a problem here? This is a hospital, gentlemen. I'll need you to." "Doctor, step back," the lead operator said, not unkindly, but with an authority that made the older man freeze mid-sentence. He turned his attention back to Elena, and for the first time, something flickered behind his hardened expression. Not aggression, but something closer to relief, maybe even guilt. 6 years, Cross. 6 years we thought you were dead. Then 3 weeks ago, a name comes across a burn notice from an asset in Kiev. A description. A face on hospital security footage from a car accident you responded to on I-40. Command didn't believe it at first. I didn't believe it. But here you are. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. If they'd found her, that meant her cover. The elaborate architecture of a normal life she'd spent 6 years constructing was already compromised. And if her old employers could find her, that meant the people she had actually been hiding from could too. The reason she'd disappeared in the first place hadn't disappeared with her. It had only been waiting. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said again, but even as the words left her mouth, she saw in his eyes that the denial was pointless. He'd already made the call. Whatever door she'd tried to close 6 years ago, it was being kicked back open tonight, in the middle of a Tuesday night shift, in front of a hospital full of witnesses who had no idea the quiet, competent nurse they worked beside had once been one of the most effective intelligence operatives the agency had ever trained, and one of the most dangerous fugitives it had ever lost. "We're not here to bring you in," the operator said, lowering his voice further, his gaze flicking briefly toward the ambulance bay doors, toward the rain, toward the darkness beyond it, as though something out there was already watching. "We're here because Vasquez is alive. He's been rebuilding his network for the past year, and 3 days ago, Intel confirmed he knows exactly where you are. We didn't come here to arrest Ghost Elena. We came here to warn her. And we're already too late to do it quietly." As if summoned by the words themselves, the hospital's power flickered once, twice, and then the entire ER lobby was plunged into a heartbeat of total darkness before the emergency backup lights kicked in, bathing the room in a dim amber glow. Somewhere outside in the parking structure, tires screeched against wet asphalt. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her, not from fear, but from the terrible, familiar clarity of a life she thought she'd left behind snapping back into focus in an instant. The nurse nobody noticed was gone. Ghost was awake. And whatever was coming through those doors next was not going to care who was wearing scrubs. The backup generators hummed to life, but the amber emergency lighting did little to cut through the sudden dread that had settled over the ER lobby. Elena's training took over before conscious thought could catch up. She was already counting exits, already noting that 2 of the 6 operators had quietly repositioned near the entrance while the other 4 fanned out toward the hallway junctions, sealing the room without anyone but her realizing it had happened. Dr. Whitfield was still sputtering questions nobody answered. A young resident named Priya had frozen behind the reception desk, phone in hand, unsure whether to call security or the police or simply run. "How many?" Elena asked the lead operator, her voice flat now, all pretense of denial gone. There was no point anymore. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had been torn off entirely, and standing in its place was the version of herself she'd spent 6 years trying to bury. "Unknown," he admitted. "Our asset lost contact with Vasquez's cell 40 minutes ago, right after they identified this location. Could be 2 men. Could be a dozen. He doesn't do subtle anymore, not since Kiev. Not since you took his brother off the board." The words landed heavier than he probably intended. Elena remembered that night in vivid, unwelcome detail. The warehouse, the rain not unlike tonight's, the decision she'd made in half a second that had haunted her for 6 years and apparently was about to get an entire hospital full of innocent people killed as payment. "Lock the ward down," she said, already moving toward the supply room. Her mind reorganizing itself around old protocols like muscle memory returning to a body that had forgotten it could run. Get every patient who can be moved into the interior hallways away from windows. "Whitfield, I need you to trust me on this even though you have no reason to." The doctor, pale but no longer arguing, nodded and began barking orders to his staff, the practiced authority of a trauma physician kicking in even amid circumstances no medical training could have prepared him for. The lead operator, whose name she'd learned in the last 90 seconds of rapid, clipped conversation, was Marcus Cole, fell into step beside her. "You've got a plan," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've had one for 6 years, Elena replied, pulling a suture kit off a shelf and tucking it into her waistband beside the compact pistol Cole had quietly handed her the moment they'd stepped into the supply room. No questions asked, no hesitation, the way soldiers hand equipment to someone they trust with their life. "I just hoped I'd never have to use it." She caught her reflection for half a second in the steel cabinet door. Scrub top, ponytail. The same tired eyes that thousands of exhausted nurses wore at 2 a.m. And felt the strange vertigo of 2 entire lives colliding inside one body. Gunfire erupted in the parking structure before she finished the thought. Not wild, not panicked. Controlled bursts, professional spacing, someone clearing a perimeter with brutal efficiency. The ER lobby lights flickered again as a black SUV that didn't belong to Cole's team crashed through the concrete barrier at the ambulance bay, its horn blaring uselessly against the chaos. Men pouring out of it before it had even fully stopped rolling. Cole's team responded instantly, taking defensive positions behind the reception desk and support columns, weapons raised, voices low and clipped over their comms. Elena didn't hesitate. She moved through the chaos the way she used to move through it years ago. Not reckless, but purposeful, every step calculated 3 moves ahead. She guided a terrified mother and her injured son into the imaging suite, wedged a gurney against the door as a barricade, and doubled back into the hallway just as the first attacker breached the lobby. She recognized him instantly, Dimitri, one of Vasquez's old lieutenants, a man she'd once shared an extraction point with in Odessa before everything fell apart. His eyes found hers across the chaos of the ER, and for a fraction of a second, something like disbelief crossed his face. "Ghost," he breathed, almost reverent, almost afraid. "He said you were dead." "Was wrong," Elena said, and the fight that followed was fast, brutal, and utterly silent to anyone who'd never seen real violence up close. No dramatic speeches, no wasted movement, just 6 years of buried instinct finally allowed to surface. When it was over, Dimitri was zip-tied to a gurney rail, and the rest of Vasquez's advance team lay scattered and subdued across the lobby floor. Cole's operators mopping up the last resistance near the ambulance bay with the calm efficiency of men who did this for a living. In the sudden, ringing silence that followed, Elena stood in the middle of the rector lobby, scrubs torn at the shoulder, breathing hard, the fluorescent emergency lights humming overhead like nothing at all had happened. Dr. Whitfield stared at her from the doorway of the imaging suite, equal parts horrified and awestruck. Cole approached slowly, lowering his weapon, studying her the way a commander studies a soldier he thought he'd lost for good. "Command's going to want you back," he said quietly. Elena looked around at the hospital she'd called home for 3 years, the machines she'd learned to read like a second language, the co-workers who trusted her without knowing the first true thing about her, the ordinary, fragile, beautiful life she'd built out of nothing. "Command can want a lot of things," she said. "Vasquez isn't finished. Neither am I. But I'm not disappearing again. Not from this place, and not from the people who need me here." Outside, the rain was finally beginning to ease, the first hint of dawn bruising the eastern sky, and somewhere far beyond the hospital walls, a war that had followed her across continents was about to find out that the woman it thought it had erased had simply been waiting, quietly, patiently, for the moment it dared to knock on her door again. If this story had your heart pounding, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because Ghost's war with Vasquez is only getting started, and you will not want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment telling us what you think Elena should do now. Share this video with someone who loves a good thriller, and join the channel family so you never miss the next chapter of this story. See you in the next one.